It's Thursday night, and we got the Rams and the Vikings. We're going to break down this game, try to identify those must starts, those sneaky starts, who not to start by viewing this matchup and how fantasy points could be scored. But before you dig in, you need to click that subscribe button right now because we're talking about the waiver wire every day. We're deep diving these players every day with the You Need series. On top of that, we're always looking at the matchups. We're looking at the game scripts to see what advantages we could gain from these games for our fantasy football lineups. Click that button. Stop missing out. Ric Flair is watching you. You do not want to disappoint him. But we're going to start things off looking at this matchup, and we got a 48 over-under. Vegas is saying we are expecting points to be scored. The last time these two teams played was in 2021. So looking at the old data here, the over-unders, how they scored, it's aged too much to really go off of. But they do tend to hit the over when these two teams play. That being said, totally different teams right now. 48 over-under. They got the point threshold set kind of high. I look for this game to be close to that. We're not looking to hit the over or under here. We're looking to see how these points can be scored and how many. And I see points being scored in this matchup. I can definitely see clock being ran pretty good in this game too, because the Rams love to use Kyren Williams. They got Kupp back, so those short targets. I look for a clock to run pretty quickly off the scoreboard here, but I do see points being scored by both teams. I look for Darnold to sling in the rock. And talking about these quarterbacks, when you're looking at the rankings here for this week in fantasy football, we got a lot of quarterbacks and good matchups here, especially on the top end of the rankings. When you project out for these quarterbacks and you're thinking about the matchups, you're looking at high-end QB2s right now, and they're volatile plays, but the volatility could spring upward with one of these quarterbacks. With Darnold, it's his connection with Justin Jefferson and hitting on those big plays. That could absolutely happen. He could score 3 touchdowns and not hit 200 yards. He could be productive in that aspect. That could happen. That's not a projection. That's just what we've seen in games past. When we're looking at Matt Stafford, he's got his Kupp back. He's going to flow the targets to him, and I expect that to happen. And I expect them to be able to run the ball a little bit. I expect this game to get a little wonky. I expect the Vikings to get up in this matchup, even though they're on the road, unless the turnovers hit. I'm expecting Darnold to be solid here, getting it to Justin Jefferson, and then the ancillary targets will get a little bit run in this matchup as well. But we're looking at a matchup here that could buoy one of these quarterbacks' production. And when I say it that way, and it sounds iffy, that's because we only had 3 quarterbacks last week exceed 300 yards. Surpassed 300 yards passing last week. So the NFL right now for passing production is like the 1970s. It's just awful in some weeks. Some weeks it's okay. But when we're looking at these quarterbacks, you're probably looking at 2 quarterbacks who will exceed 200 yards passing. 2 quarterbacks that will probably hit 2 or more touchdowns each. So you're going to see okay fantasy production. It's just whether or not you're going to make that start. My honest opinion, you shouldn't be rolling with 2 quarterbacks anyways. So if you don't have one of the top guys and you're looking at one of these quarterbacks as a streamer off the waiver wire, I think they're both okay gambles. That being said, we're looking at the run game here for the Vikings. And Aaron Jones is solid. He's been solid all year long as he's healthy and on the field, as long as there's no hiccups. And we're going up against the Rams. They're about league average when it comes to allowing fantasy points to running backs. These last few weeks, they've been a little bit lower when it comes to allowing fantasy points to running backs. However, the volume's there for Aaron Jones using the passing game. You can't stack the box or Justin Jefferson's going to go off. Or Jordan Addison. They got a lot of weapons here, so you can't stack the box against Aaron Jones. And he's a nightmare to cover in space, averaging 16.9 PPR fantasy points per game. Considering the Rams can slow down the run a little bit, not stifle it or shut it off, I look for him 12 to 15 range-ish. Depends if he pops off for that long gain or touchdown. But I look for him to be very safe. I think the odds of him scoring like 5 fantasy points are very low. I think it takes an injury for that to happen. I think the odds of him getting you a 30-pack of stones here isn't really great, but I think it's greater than him scoring 5 fantasy points. I look for that 12 to 15 spot. Maybe we could hit 20, but I feel very safe with Aaron Jones. The other running backs, it's only gambling with DFS plays. not traditional redraft, not in traditional lineups, maybe in super deep leagues, super deep lineups, but you already know what you're going to do at that point because you've been living that life. We're looking at these wide receivers here for the Vikings against the Rams. The Rams are funny against wide receivers. The start of the season, it wasn't looking too hot. Marvin Harrison Jr. with a 29 spot. J-Mo with a 24.4. Juwan Jennings, 46.5. But then we got some weird game scripts. So the wide receiver production against the Rams will be game script dependent. I look for this to be a high-scoring game because Vegas said so, and mainly because both these teams can produce points on the box score. I also see a lot of clock ran, so most of these points might come off at the end of the game from what I'm seeing, but that's just a bold prediction. But we're looking at the recent trends here. I mean, the Raiders, that was a nasty matchup. The Packers, that wasn't a great game for them. And then the Bears, they lost to that one. That being said, I think Justin Jefferson's pretty safe in this game, and you're always going to start him anyways. It's not like I'm going to say, hey, don't start Justin Jefferson, and it's not like you're going to look at Justin Jefferson when he's healthy and say, I'm not going to start him. You're going to put him in there, and you're just going to eat whatever happens. Jordan Addison, Jalen Naylor, those guys are pretty volatile week to week when it comes to fantasy production. They're coin flips with anybody else in the coin flip area of the fantasy football rankings, and that really depends on the game scripts, how the ball's flowing in the offense, and if Justin Jefferson is not siphoning all the targets and Aaron Jones is just killing it in the run game. If the Vikings get up early, expect the passing volume to curtail a little bit, so you really need the Rams to be on point for the ancillary wide receivers to score more fantasy production and get more looks. That being said, there's a lot of variables here with these two wide receivers. They're gamble starts. They're okay to start because the matchup's okay with a 48 over-under. So around wide receiver, 35 to 45 range you're looking at with Jordan Addison, somewhere around there. You're not 100% confident, but the over-under here could break that tie for you. And now we're just waiting for the king to come back, because you're not starting any of these tight ends unless you're in a deep league. We're just waiting for the king to come back here. If you want to start one of these random tight ends, good luck to you. It is a good matchup for them. The Rams allow fantasy points to tight ends, but it's usually stud tight ends, Brock Bowers, Trey McBride, Tucker Kraft. If you're hearing anybody just bring up they're second in the league when allowing fantasy points to tight ends, tell them to shut up, because you got to look at how these points are scored, and they're allowing fantasy points to stud tight ends, to stud options. So you may want to look at those ancillary wide receivers. Look at them as a gamble if you want to gamble with somebody in your lineup if you're hurting at wide receiver, because this could be the game for you, because those targets are more likely to go to one of those two wide receivers. Kyren Williams is just going to volume himself into fantasy production like he does every single week. He's getting a ton of snaps, leading the league among running backs and snaps each week, 85 plus a game. That is a lot of snaps. He's getting a lot of touches, and it's just going to mount the fantasy points. The question is he going to be an RB2 or is he going to be an RB1? When we're looking at what the Vikings do on defense when it comes to fantasy production to the opposing running backs, they're averaging 26.3 PPR fantasy points per game to the running backs. And Kyren Williams is getting all the work, so he should be delivering you something. Also, those numbers are buoyed by Jahmyr Gibbs, scoring 32 fantasy points. They've been up and down all season. I look for him to at least get you in double digits and be there quite easily. And it's hard for him to bust in any matchup, because he's getting so much work. Kyren Williams, as long as he's breathing air on the field, he's going to get a lot of snaps, and he's going to get a lot of opportunities, and that's just going to lead into fantasy production, whether it be touchdowns or a lot of carries. That being said, 3.8 yards per carry, but the work is there. We're getting a lot of volume, and you're just going to start Kyren Williams. I would not be looking at any other running backs on the Rams. They're not getting enough work. They're not getting enough snaps. There's a chance if the twig snaps due to getting so much work, they might get that working opportunity, but we're not going to bet on that until it happens. Cooper Kupp is back, and this is going to be an interesting dichotomy among these wide receivers, and a lot of you guys are going to question whether or not to start him. I'm personally going to fire him up in my lineups. If you want to tail that, go ahead, but that's not a projection, because there are some things outside the realms of possibilities, like re-injury, not getting snaps, all that stuff, I just feel good from what I saw in the practice clips from last week to throw him in. Puka Nacua could be back. He's not pictured, but he could be back. We're watching that. That is a proposition that you just have to make. You either start him or you don't. It is very risky. I think I want to see things through with him. He has been practicing, but I want to see him play at least some snaps first to see what kind of snap share he's getting, what kind of target share he's getting, what kind of route participation rate he's getting in his first game back. Maybe give him a game to ramp up. But you might be hurting so much that you're just going to take that risk anyway. So just look at your team, what you want to do, how your gut feels about that. I do not have anything point blank, and nobody does. And if they're saying they do, then that's just ignorance, because nobody knows outside of Puka Nacua and the Rams. So why project that? On top of that, the Vikings deliver fantasy production to wide receivers. And if you're feeling good about Kupp, then you might be feeling good about this game. When you're looking at Demarcus Robinson and Tutu Atwell, they're gambles, especially if Puka Nacua is back. And if Puka Nacua is back, then we're looking at some competition in this offense. And if Nacua is back here, Tutu Atwell could be the hitter here due to the speed, the size-adjusted athleticism here. He could be the sneaky play. Demarcus Robinson gets those targets downfield. Jordan Whittington is out. He's not going to be in. Less exposure due to Cooper Kupp anyways. I am looking, and if I have to lean to one of those ancillary wide receivers, I think Tutu Atwell. He's just been more productive recently. But honestly, coin flip, pick what you want if you have to between the two. This is a good matchup for the wide receivers here. Look for Cooper Kupp to come back and emerge and look good. We're looking at Colby Parkinson here. This is a decent matchup for him. The Vikings give up fantasy points to good tight ends. Parkinson's been getting volume and opportunity. I look for the ball to go to Kyren Williams and the wide receivers, but considering tight ends are going to tight end, like I say every week, he should be running a lot of routes, he should be seeing targets, he should be seeing opportunity in this matchup. I think Colby Parkinson could hit for you in this matchup, but it's a gamble. All tight ends are a gamble, and it's a question of whether or not can we cross the goal line, get that red zone look, and be able to score you those fantasy points. And it's like that with 90% of the tight ends, because he's not going to rack up targets and catches in this matchup like a traditional wide receiver or a top-tier tight end. But that work could be sneakily in there with a 48 over-under. Parkinson is a tight end that you're gambling with because you don't have any other tight ends and you're playing this matchup. And if you like the matchup, then you can do so. I'm not going to hate it, but the tight end position is very up and down. You could sneak into production and this could flatline on you, but that's just how the cookie crumbles at the tight end position from week to week. It is a very advantageous situation here with a high-scoring game that's potentially going to happen. And we're looking at the Rams here that's got to compete with the Vikings and push the pace with them, especially if Justin Jefferson and company hits on the field. That being said, he could be a sneaky play this week. I wouldn't make that bet, but that's a bet you could potentially make if you need to squeeze some juice into your lineup and just make that gamble. Let me know what you think in the comments below. Make sure to hit that subscribe button on the way out. Thank you for watching. Catch you on the next video.